So welcome everyone. Good evening. It's good to have everyone here this evening. Tonight, the goal is to have a discussion and a time for questions related to sample collection and submission of data for genomic enhanced estimated breeding values. And so Tom has a nice little presentation here put together to get us started and to highlight some points of discussion to get started. Certainly not limited to those points, but I'll turn the floor over to Tom and let him kind of give us a little bit of a review on what we've discussed last week and open things up for discussion.
Thanks a lot, Andrew, and just, thanks for all your help in setting these things up. It's been super helpful. Yeah, I wanted to go over a number of different topics tonight, just so that we're sure we covered everything. So that we put some sort of guardrails on this discussion, here are some of the topics that I wanted to go over tonight. And as we go through those topics, I have a series of slides. I have a slide on each one of these. We can sort of get into detail on each one. But I want to start with just a brief review of the process to make sure everybody's got that, understands that, and then talk a little bit about, open up some questions about TSUs and the whole on-farm sampling idea. And everybody seems to, I've talked to a number of people since last week, and everybody's got a slightly different approach, which makes total sense. I want to have Rusty walk us through the DNA sample submission form, just so he knows it better than anybody, and I think he's the best person to do that. So questions on the sample submission form and that whole process, we can hit up Rusty at that point. And then we should have a serious discussion about batching dates and what that means and what's going to happen. And then I've got at the very end, I've got some updates on some things that we've just learned about recently, and I wanted to share those things. So is that cool with everybody? We're going to walk through a series of topics. I guess as we go to the first one, this quick review, if you've got a question on anything, just feel free to interrupt and we'll go through, but we'll go over the steps in the process all at once. And then when we're done with that, we can move on to the next topic. But as you heard last Tuesday, everybody's going to be responsible for purchasing their own TSUs from whatever vendor you choose to do so. As you are probably aware, each TSU is going to cost you a little over $2. Each animal or each sample is going to require its own TSU. It's a self-contained little unit. You just need the applicator. The applicator is roughly $45 to $50, depending on where you get it. There's a whole series of considerations when it comes to sampling. Which animals to sample, how many samples, the whole, the costs of it, all that sort of stuff. So that's something to touch on again tonight, but that's a pretty important component. We're going to be submitting our samples to Rusty at his office in Iowa, and we're going to be doing that by a specific batching date. I think I mentioned last week that batching date is going to ensure that everything gets run in a short period of time immediately after that batching date. And we're going to have a few batching dates each year, and that's the way we're going to be set up here going forward. You're going to get a series of feedback on the tissue samples you submit. The first piece of information we're going to get is some reports on parentage and conditions. So these are the genomically confirmed parentage, which is why it's absolutely critical we get our tissue ID number and our animal matched up correctly. The genetic conditions are something we talked about last week as well. These causative genes that result in scrapie resistance or myostatin or OPP susceptibility. Those are the three we're talking about right now. There's some issues on the third one, but we're working on resolving those as quickly and easily as we can. Then we fall back to the same old where we're submitting our phenotypic data, the weights, the fecal egg counts, the number born, number weaned, and everything. in our download from or our upload from Pedigree Master, but this time we'll have to have just confirm that the parentage that we assigned originally is the genomically verified parentage, and then it's off to Stephen Field in Australia for the evaluation, and then he crunches that like he always did, except now when we get our report back, the report's going to be representing genomic enhanced estimated breeding values, not the traditional breeding values. So there's going to be some increase in accuracy and a slight adjustment in the value itself. So anybody have any questions or thoughts about the overall process for obtaining these? Is that all clear to everyone? I don't mean to rush. I just want to keep things moving along. Feel free to speak up. And
Tom, you have to go into Pedigree Master. I mean, just can't emphasize it. You have to go into Pedigree Master and verify that it's a genomic parent. So if you don't do that, you're not going to get the genomically enhanced EBVs.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, I'm going to press on. I didn't think we'd have a whole lot of questions on that, but I just wanted to give an opportunity to be sure everybody was comfortable and on the same page. I think when it comes to TSUs and the on-farm sampling, there may be some continued questions or concerns out there. So I wanted to open up the floor for that. If anybody has any questions right off, that's great. We do have people seen lists of vendors? There was a list that circulated on the Katahdin email chat group here a while back. I think Michelle circulated that. There may be others. Anybody not finding potential vendors if you've looked?
Has anybody checked into buying like 10,000 and getting a break, or 5,000 or whatever? Or I mean, I could do it if no, or is anybody, we could have, I could volunteer the Eastern Alliance to do it and be a and then they would sell people at reduced price if, maybe Neogen would give a break or something. But why don't I look into that?
I think it's a great idea. I think Michelle said that she thought the Angus or Simmental group were probably doing that. So that might be a good opportunity. Anybody seen a price less than $2.10?
Simmentals were a little less, I think, weren't they?
Right, and probably because of what we just described, but yeah.
I mean, Eastern Alliance could do it for all of NSIP and generate a little money for the group.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Enough said.
There's been some discussion this week amongst a number of people running some possible scenarios by in terms of matching sample ID to sheep ID. Folks seen those discussions on the Katahdin chat group?
Yep.
I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, but I did see there was a discussion there, and seems pretty simple. A number of people are going to do it slightly differently, I think. I haven't totally decided how I'm going to do it either, but and getting that out there is getting a sense as to how you're going to do it and how you're going to lay those out. I mean, Karen Kanagi circulated she took some pictures of the TSU next to an ear tag or something like that, and that's great. I think that serves as a super backup in case something really goes wrong. I'm not sure I want to have 110 photographs to go through or 200 photographs to go through, but I do think the little box is increasingly interesting to me. The insert inside of it, you could just have the insert comes out, goes to your desk, and you can enter off of that. It seems pretty straightforward. Anybody else have any thoughts that are above and beyond what we've seen or read about on the chat group?
Michelle should write an app for the cell phone, for your cell phone to click on TSU at the same time as the animal. So it's in a spreadsheet that then we can upload onto our computers.
Let's not assume, Jim, that everybody's got a cell phone that can take pictures.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay away from I'm trying to get a spreadsheet so I don't have to look at, looking at pictures. There are some ways to go from cell phones to spreadsheets.
Or that has enough memory on their phone to be able to do it. Can you write on these things?
No.
No.
No?
Kathy, if you can see my,
Yeah, I've got one here in front of me, Lynn.
okay.
I've got mine.
I
But,
don't, yeah, I don't think you can write on them.
but is it illegal to write on them? Or is it are you saying that physically it's not possible?
I'm saying physically it's not possible.
Okay.
Well, Kathy only needs 2 digits.
Right.
Well, she might be able to do it then.
I've tried using the TSUs with the box, and we've tried them. We ended up getting them in bulk without the box. And the only way to go is to get the box, because you can write the tag number right there on that little insert as you're filling them out. And then it also keeps you from making mistakes where you missed somebody. And then what I do is I type it in a spreadsheet and then copy down the numbers because they're all in sequential order. And then my tag numbers also I can copy down, as well as the NSIP number, just copy down. And that seems to be very quick.
Okay.
I know that 3 to 4 years ago, Flockfiler, which is was working to be able to collect data with a cell phone. I mean, I think that, if you could get it into a spreadsheet that you can import, but the box may be good enough, as Janice suggested.
So Jan, what do you do with your TSU once it's punched? Do you put it back in the box, or do you just throw it in a bag, or it doesn't matter at that point?
No, we put them back in the box, and I probably have about 30 boxes sitting here right now where it's all stored. And then I don't know if we're going to send all of these in or not, but I was looking at that, the little blue boxes that hold, is it 96 samples in there? I was looking at maybe sending them in those to send them to Rusty. If I don't send them all, I don't know. I'm still kind of figuring out what we need to do to send them in.
Yeah, I know if you ship by UPS or something like that, that's a function of weight and size. So if you were to send Rusty a big box of those little boxes, it seems like you'd be paying for a lot of cardboard space versus in a bag. And I'm going to guess that Rusty's going to prefer to get them in a loose in a bag, but I'll let him answer that. How would you prefer to get them, Rusty?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to make a whole lot of difference on how I receive them. I would say whatever's easiest on your end, because I'm going to physically remove each of those samples to scan them all into the system anyways, and then put them off into the containers they're going to be shipped over to Neogen in. So on my end, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference.
Well, if you took my priority mail, the $5 to $6 box ought to be able to handle 50 to 70 samples.
Yeah, and mail.
That's my thought exactly. You want them to get there?
So
They are.
Neogen will just be reporting data on the number that's on that bottle. They have no clue who the ID of that animal is, correct?
That's correct. All that Neogen is concerned with is the sample ID.
Okay.
And then the spreadsheet that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, that is how they're going to tie that sample ID number to the individual sheep ID number.
Gotcha. That's your job, right?
Oh, it's your job to get it to me, and my
Yeah,
job
right.
to get it into the format they need for what they need on their end.
Okay. Gotcha.
What, there was some discussion about storage. I think last time there were some folks asking questions about what do we do once we punch them? Do we freeze them? Do we refrigerate them? Do we sit them? You know, I guess Lynn's comment was not on your dashboard of your truck in the sun. But other than that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. What have people done so far? Jan, how are you storing yours before you ship them off?
Right now, they're in the original Allflex, the boxes that they come in, and then in a big box, but they're in here in my office until I send them out.
Okay, so they're in a room temperature sort of thing, so they're not frozen or anything.
If
Yep.
you're gonna ship them the Neogen within 6 months to 12 months, it shouldn't matter. Then if you are saving samples that 3 years down the road, you might be interested. We should get the professional advice on that. But in the short-term storage of 6 to 12 months, it should, as long as they're not on the dashboard, it should be okay. And it's, if you, as Jan has done, they've sampled a lot more than they're going to ship at this point. It'd be good to get somebody like Brenda Murdoch to weigh in and tell us how do we store those ones that may be around for 2 to 3 years, that we may in 2 to 3 years, you know, somebody we sold an animal to says, yeah, we want it, you know, that sort of thing. So I'll send an email to Brenda Murdoch on long-term storage.
So since last week, I wrapped up that document called the On-Farm Strategies. It got reviewed by Dr. Lewis and Dr. Brito, and that's up at the NSIP website now. And that really goes through in a little bit more detail the annual sampling strategy. I mean, it just builds off the original document that those two researchers have established for all of NSIP. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that before you start sampling, I would encourage you to get a copy of that, take a copy of that, and it's only like 3.5 pages, so it's not like it's a huge document, but it does have some thoughts. If people have seen it and had any issues, I'd love to know if they think it needs something else, because I could update it pretty easily. Folks pretty comfortable with, they have a plan for sampling which animals at this point? Do you folks know if you're going to take the high road or the low road, the diversity road, or the focused whole litter approach? You thought about that at all? A lot of old timers on here right now, so
My plan is to do my 2020 replacements that I kept and the 2021, but I haven't decided on those yet. And whatever new rams that didn't get sampled, that was my first thing. And then I had a weird situation this year where a set of twin sisters lambed next to each other at the same time, and both wanted to claim one of the 3 lambs, the same one. And I ended up doling them out. I gave the big single to the big ewe and the twins to the little one, and I don't know if I got that right. So those two, I guess I need to sample. especially the ram lamb, if I sell them to an NSIP flock, I would assume.
Yeah, good point.
And Joan Burke was talking to me, and she's trying to figure out whether she has enough for a research paper or a producer paper, but it does appear that a lot of the rejected lambs are not their lamb. You know, I ate a ewe this year that rejected a lamb, and that's part of the reason I ate her. But the project shut the genomics project, so that lamb wasn't hers. So,
Well, mine eventually, I mean, the one took the ram lamb easily. The other one took the 2 ewe lambs after pinning them up for a couple days. But, you know, that wasn't the issue. It was more now. I mean, I could codon test because the one ram was RR, one was QR, and the 2 lambs, but that's not going to be definitive either unless a QR comes out of what I thought was 2 RR parents.
it's not quite on this topic, but now Joan and I are thinking that a lot of the rejected lambs are the lamb is latched onto the wrong ewe, and our project with the OREI project supports that, at least at the anecdotal level, and Joan's trying to figure out whether there's enough data there to go to research. But they're definitely finding in their flock where their parentage testing every animal, and they're finding that pretty, I don't know statistically, but I think I think we're going to understand a lot, not that I want to say the Katahdins have a lot of rejected lambs, but I think rejected lambs are going to be rejected for a better reason in many cases.
So I'm curious if people have thought about when they're going to sample. That seems to be a topic that I have 2 small flocks, so I haven't entirely figured out when to sample for my pasture-born flock yet. And I'd love to hear some thoughts on when people are sampling. Like, Lisa, what are you thinking about?
I was just typing it out now. I'm going to sample around the 60-day weaning weight. I think I'm going to take some weights the weekend before. I'm going to take my real weights and determine which ones I want to retain, to get a kind of an idea, because I'm only going to sample 60, and 10 of those are going to be the retains from 2020. So that just leaves 50 lambs out of 84 to sample from. And I guess the strategy in that particular scenario is to sample the litter mates to those animals I want to keep. Is that what I'm understanding from the literature?
Yes, I believe so. For your situation, yep.
We're sampling every lamb. We're taking the tissue sample of every lamb as we tag them. What Dan's been doing is when he does the ear punch, then he puts the management tag in the same hole that was left from the TSU. Then I'm gonna send in our next NSIP run and probably send in definitely everybody that scores over a 110, plus, definitely our replacement lambs. But that's where I'm going to start on exactly who to send in for the genomic testing.
I guess when we see the dates of the batch runs, that may affect what we send in early and what we send in later.
What's David Copeland going to do?
what David Copeland is going to do is spend a whole lot of money, sample way more than I ought to, and probably do it all on its lonesome one day. Because my experience with how smart I am is that I can only do one thing at a time. And I don't want to try vaccinating them and sampling them. I suppose that perhaps I could take those samples when I take all the fecal samples, you know, just so I'm only financially hemorrhaging once. Jim and I have been talking a little bit about who I ought to sample, and I had so many done on this project at Jones that I'm thinking mainly just lambs and a few people that I'm uncertain of.
So David, you had a vet on site to sample, to do the blood samples for the project.
Yes.
So at $2.10 a TSU, are you coming out ahead? If you did it,
my vet liked beer.
Okay, not a strategic question. Okay, good enough.
Well, no, I mean, I'll come out ahead. Boy, howdy, those blood draws were tough on some of the little ones. I mean, so yeah, I think in terms of aggravation, I'd a lot rather punch a hole in their ear than I would draw the sample of blood. So does that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah, I was just curious what your strategy was going to be.
Well, I think that I will probably overspend this year. And as we know more next year, I'll probably be a little more focused by taking advantage of my mistakes and other people's mistakes this year.
I think you're not alone there. I'm probably in the same
Yeah.
Sample more this year than I will in the future, and I'll probably regret having spent that much money, but who knows? There are a number of people that have told me in the past week or 10 days that they plan to sample everything. And honestly, small flocks, if you've got 20 ewes, 15 ewes, well, 20 ewes really, I mean, go for it. I guess it's really not, I mean, if you had 200, different story altogether, but if you can do it, I think that's, and I've had some new flocks talk to me about it as well. And, if it's a new flock and it doesn't have many ewes, it seems like it's not going to break the bank. So it seems like a logical thing to do. Just jump in with both feet.
It's only going to hurt for a little while when you write the check.
So we do. So if both David Copeland and John Bear sample, we may figure out how much myostatin is out there.
Right.
That could pay for David, that could pay for John Bear, since they've been working with Texel. And that has some value for the breed if we think at the whole breed level.
I already know I got a lot of it, but I mean, probably everything carries it at this point in my flock, except for the rams that I bring in. There's probably about 12% that don't.
So how many are homozygous?
Now that's a better question, but and I actually, to facilitate it, I actually quit testing ewes a long time ago because I didn't want to put my thumb on the scale of performance and delude myself into thinking that homozygous ewes were better performers. But that's the better question. But there's probably I estimate probably about 25% are going to be homozygous.
And will these TSUs tell us, Jim, if they're homozygous or not?
Tom? That's
Yes.
Tom's question.
Tom?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it will tell us.
It should, as far
I
as
have
I
not
know.
seen a report. I have not seen a copy of that report. Rusty might have a insight into that. I don't know.
I haven't seen a myostatin report, but I think based on our conversations with him, we should know if they are heterozygous or homozygous.
And so if Brad Frecken keeps working on the TMAM 154, the OPP, and homozygous is even more important on that. In some, at least in a practical aspect.
Yeah, if it can tell the difference between RR, QR, and QQ, you should be able to get all three. I mean, or you should be able to get homozygous versus heterozygous easy peasy.
I know.
Bringing the subject back to testing strategies, no one has mentioned testing your herd SARS. So I just want to throw that out there that don't forget to test your herd SARS.
I just wanted to go back to the financial side. I really liked in one of the webinars, I forget who brought it up, the strategy of saying, I'm willing to spend X amount on genotyping, setting a budget for what you're willing to spend that year, and then going back to these on-farm sampling strategies and figuring out, okay, within that budget, how can I most efficiently or most effective get the bang for my buck? I really like that strategy of setting a budget for it.
The other way to, I think it's, that's anybody who's fall lambing. Joan Burke's research has shown that if she puts 3 rams in with her fall lambing flock, she gets about 150% more lambs. That she gets close to 80% of the ewes lambing versus 40 to 50%. And she gets a lot more twins. So anybody fall lambing, the ability to get more lambs that are registered using the genomic testing will work. So we think that's showing. So for those of you that are fall lambing, put in several rams and then then do the chip on all of them, and you'll get your money back at $32 a sample.
So I think,
Go ahead.
So I was just going to kind of, I think that probably the most helpful thing, and it is going to vary, is for everybody to do kind of a tiered approach. What is the most important, and kind of rank them and then make those decisions. I mean, it's easy if you decided you did everything. I don't think I'm going to do that this year, but I think, as Lynn pointed out, that number one is the rams. And then this year, my rams mixed. I had ewe lambs mix around in my ewe lambs. So anything, my rams breeding ewe lambs. So that's a no-brainer. I need parentage on those. So that was going to happen anyway. But I think one of the questions that I have, and then anything that I wanted to test for myostatin to pick a home-raised sire, I'm going to do. But one of the questions I have, I think the strategy of testing your ewe lambs that are successful, wait until those ewe lambs have raised lambs, you've decided to retain them, I think, and they're going to be, added to your flock properly. I think those are a priority. But I guess, one of the things that came out in the webinars was not testing the ewes that are the oldest in the flock, because we already have a high accuracy on those. But isn't that going to be important? Because, those older ewes, I have some older ewes that are, you can flip through a pedigree and by jolly, they're going to show up all the way through it. So, I mean, would you want to do that because you're tying it, you're tying the genetics to those older ewes that already have a higher accuracy to improve the accuracy on the younger animals?
That's my understanding, John, is that if you have older brood ewes that are foundational for your flock, you could really nail down the genomic pedigree, but there's an incremental benefit. So if you did every one of her daughters and all of her sisters, the law of diminishing returns is going to kick in pretty darn fast, I think is the point on that. So there is definitely an advantage to doing it, but that advantage is probably not as big as you might think, because you've already, you've got so many of the female relatives there as well, and you can only improve just so much. But there is this clause that Dr. Lewis wanted us to include, which was regarding these exceptional old ewes. And if you want to consider that some of these foundational ewes, I think that's a fair statement. But I do understand what you're saying. And does Lynn or Rusty, have you?
Yeah, I'll say
what I just said.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things here. Number one, I think Tom just nailed that explanation, maybe better and more concisely than I've ever heard it. I think, John, for those of us that have kind of followed this technology for several years, this single step methodology and statistics that they're using now is so much different than what they had 2 or 3 years ago. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it, but I think Tom nailed it. The older proven ewes are important, but again, it's the cost analysis of, if you're sampling several of their daughters that are already in your flock, it may not pay to actually do it. So.
Yeah, thanks.
Having said that, John, I have a one old ewe that I'm probably going to do just because I'm not sure if that makes me type A or type B, but whatever. I'm going to do her just because she is a component of so many things, and damn it, I'm going to spend the $32 on her. So she doesn't, she doesn't owe me anything. So in the interest of time, are there other questions or concerns regarding TSUs or on-farm sampling or any of that we can touch on? And if not, I wanted to move on to the next topic.
We do have
Speak
one
up.
raised hand.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yep. I'm not following the chat, Andrew, so you can feel free to interject with that.
I'm just wondering, when you have using the breeding up program, do you want to do a TSU collection on the ewe that's up to 50%? Or do you want to wait until you've bred them up first so that you've got a little bit more in their pedigree to take advantage of?
Wow, good question.
I personally would want to do them at 50% because I want the accuracy on those texel crosses, but that's just my situation.
I had a discussion with a breeder in North Carolina today that is not a member of NSIP yet, but is thinking about joining and doesn't have a large flock and wants to know if there would be some advantage to joining. And he proposed, and he has that same situation where he has some commercial Katahdin ewes and with no background on them, no pedigrees, no nothing. and asked me if it was worthwhile in sampling those. And then he told me 2 or 3 of them are his best use, hands down his best use. And that just answered it for me. It gets back to John's question about these older ewes. I think, and this is just my opinion, and I don't know if there's a wrong answer or a right answer here, but if you had some grading up ewes that were really the genetics you were after and you really have stumbled onto something, I wouldn't hesitate to sample them. But if you had 50 of them, I'm not sure I would do it at the 50% level or wait until you get, because part of it is you're going to have, so what I said in North Carolina today was, if you don't have phenotypic data behind those commercial ewes with essentially no pedigree, then it doesn't really make any difference. He was talking about sampling a ram that was from an outside flock that had no phenotypic data, and I'm like, it really is not going to, I don't think it's going to add a whole lot. But I said, these old ewes that you have, that you like so much, do you have any back years worth of data? Oh, of course I do. I have, 3 or 4 years worth of data on them. So if that's the case, if you have phenotypic data on these ewes, I think that might be a deciding factor as well. Because without phenotypic data, it's just a DNA sample, as far as I'm aware. We're not doing, we have to match the phenotypic data to the SNP data to be able to understand the relationship and know which production traits are shared, the genetics for which production traits are shared amongst individuals, shared with your sire, shared with your dam. And if we don't have the production data on some of these animals, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend the money. But correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but that's my understanding at this point in time.
But on that flock in North Carolina, if he only submits phenotypic data on 1 or 2 ewes from 3 to 4 years back, that contemporary group doesn't mean anything. He would need to submit a whole spread.
Yeah, he's got that. He's got that.
He does have that, but he'd need to go back and do enough of the back year's phenotypic data. And if he does enough of that, then we as a Katahdin breed would be very, very pleased if he truly has stellar ewes. We want those in the reference population.
Yeah.
But without EBVs, he's doing it on, observation and anecdotal. So.
Right. So I don't know who it was who asked the question, but I think that those 50% ewes, if you have some data behind them, you might consider doing that. So that's my thought on it, but it's just my opinion, I guess.
Yeah, anything that helps the accuracy on a 50% ewe, all my 50% that I don't know a sire or dam on, even after 4 years, they still have EBVs close to 0. So it'll be interesting for us to test some of those with SNPs to see if we can move their EBVs away from 0.
It might move.
Thank you.
Sure. Other thoughts before we move on?
I have a question about reports, but I guess you're running.
Yeah, we will get. Okay. Yeah, we'll get down there, Roxanne.
I got a question,
So,
Tom, Stan. Is there any sampling technique that would help us with clustering, to jump across clusters a little better?
That's a Ron Lewis question.
Yeah, that's 3-dimensional chess there.
It should
Okay,
help break down. It should help break down clusters. And it should break the barriers between clusters because we'll know a lot more about markers that go across it. Tom, you think? Tom, Lynn, anybody else? I think it should help with clusters.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to look at that, the connections after, we get some of these genotypes on the files, just because it will let us know how genetically related animals are across those clusters.
So
we don't really know until we get the genotypes in.
So we need Ron to get a new graduate student, because I think this is a PhD thesis level to look at how genomics impacts clustering, because this clustering work that Ron did is based on 10 to 15 years ago when he was in the UK. So, it should break down the clusters. It can break down the clusters. We just need a graduate student or a postdoc to figure out that. So one of us needs to email Ron and say, hire a graduate student real quick to break down clusters with genomics.
Yeah, in the long run, I totally agree with Jim. In the short run, Dan, we still need to buy RAMs from outside our cluster.
I agree with that. And so I guess I should have finished my comment with, would it not be helpful to even maybe sample heavy to an outside RAM's young? If you see what I'm saying, like, so if I've got my old sturdy RAMs and my old sturdy ewes, sampling them isn't going to tell me a lot. But I bring in a RAM from across the country. Now I sample his lambs a little heavier. That's probably going to be more helpful on the cluster deal.
I'm not going to disagree with that. That's an interesting comment. And
yeah, I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, but I don't have an answer either, but it makes sense.
If the ram has 20 to 30 progeny and you keep 5 to 10 daughters of his, it matters less on how you sample. If he has some markers or SNPs that are different than our reference population, then it would pay. So it depends on the ram and how different genetically he is from our reference population, Dan. If you get 20 lambs and you keep 5 to 10 daughters, the SNPs aren't going to help you tell much about him in a couple years. Right, Tom?
That's my understanding.
Yeah. So unless he has some really weird SNPs that are different than what we know about, and we need to retrain our reference population, I don't think, Dan, think about it in that term. If you bring in an outside ram, maybe a few extra progeny might help you evaluate that ram sooner. But as soon as you get 2 to 3 years on him, the phenotypes are going to outweigh what the SNPs tell you.
Yeah, he would be an NSIP RAM. I'm just saying I bring him across from 2 clusters away. That's all. And so anyway, sorry to interrupt the conversation.
That's fine.
I think that as a Katahdin breed, it's worth looking at if we can use SNPs to break down clusters. And I think this is a great question for Ron.
So also,
for
as
that
far as
later in the week.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I had a quick question. So again, if you're trying to prioritize your testing, if you have rams that are coming from flocks that are going to be heavily genomic enhanced, are you better off focusing on the progeny and the rams that are not, or your home, potentially your home raised rams where you don't, they're not you know, if you are line breeding a little bit and bringing those in, are you better off putting them there, or, you know, and focusing on the unknown populations if you, as opposed to rams from, you know, a quote unquote known or heavily genotyped population?
So the trade-off there is, my understanding is that with regards to balancing this continuum from establishing the genetic diversity in the production traits within your flock versus absolutely nailing the genomic pedigree. And everybody's going to fit somewhere in between there. If you're relatively new to NSIP, don't have a lot of linkages, it's probably best to establish yourself, establish your understanding of the genetic diversity in your flock. Whereas somebody like you, John, who's been in it for a long time, you know, you probably already have enough years worth of information for the system to know the breadth of diversity and production traits that you have today. But really nailing down this concept of shared genes, shared alleles, essentially, between individuals, between litter mates, between sire and progeny, dam and progeny, and that whole genomic pedigree begins to make more sense. So, I mean, I don't think there's anything that says that you couldn't do a little bit of both, that you couldn't, if you're keeping a group of ewes, you're keeping a set of ewe lambs out of an established ewe line, and you know you're sampling every member of that litter, but you've brought in a couple of animals that are less connected, you've done a little bit less with them, you haven't had them that long, and if you wanted to sample one lamb from each of their litters, I don't see why you couldn't do a hybrid approach. Just weighing, it's a continuum, okay? It's a spectrum from one to the other, and we have to sort of think of it in those terms. Somebody who's been in this for, you know, 10 or 15 years or more, we're going to have a little bit different approach than somebody who's been in it for a couple of years. But really, it comes down to not so much your participation as the individuals. If you brought in some ewes from outside, which I've done 3 times, I think, 3 or 4 times over the 15 years. So at this point, I haven't brought anybody in new in 5 or 6 years, so I'm not going to bother. But that is an interesting point. You could take a hybrid approach to the current recommendations in the way you sample.
So another thought, Tom, is if you have a ram and a ewe, they're very divergent for the maternal traits, maternal weaning weight, number born, number weaned in the index. You could think about sampling those lambs to know, because they could have gotten the very worst or the very best from both, and you could sample the lambs out of those. Yep. Sample the lambs out of those highly divergent matings in terms of the maternal traits.
Yeah.
To get a better idea whether the lamb you're keeping got the average, got the low end, or got the high end.
Yeah, that's a legitimate argument. There's no right or wrong way. Everyone's going to do it slightly differently, and that's all fine.
Well, I've got one question. I'm thinking I know the answer, but I bought those 2 groups of ewes from Mark, the 5 ewes that were in the 99th percentile and the 10 ewe lambs that were 95th and above last year. So obviously I should sample all of those and all of their offspring, I would think, to kind of get some of that marked data that's all in NSIP, but to, you know, tie it a little bit more closely in. Is that a valid thought, or?
David and John, yeah, David and John, to your point, I think the way to look at this, and I've been slapped on the wrist for putting a number on this, but the genomic information is equal to X number of progeny. X number of progeny. And it varies by trade, it varies by producer, actually, depending on how much ancestral data you have. And that's why I've been told not to put a number on this, but just think about the fact that that genomic chip, that sample you're sending in is worth X number of progeny. And so that's where we're getting the boost in accuracy. And so for an animal that has very little data, ancestral data or progeny data in NSIP, we're going to get the best bang for our buck by sampling those animals. But an animal that has a ton of NSIP history already, we're not going to get as much of a benefit, and especially in animals that have already produced progeny. So the animals that are somewhat naive to the system are going to get the biggest bang for the buck, and they're probably I won't say the most valuable, but to an individual producer, they might be the most valuable to sample. And then, of course, animals that have a lot of progeny, probably it's going to be hard to justify from a cost point of view sampling those. And so that's kind of the way I wrap my head around it.
So I'd follow Lynn was saying that Mark is probably doing a better job than most of us at getting good phenotypic data and maybe submitting DNA for SNP chipping. So it'd be worth, I think Brad Frecking or Tom Murphy would tell you what they're planning on doing with the parentage of that, David. And that,
I agree, Jim, but like David is going to just have to look at the pedigrees himself and see, okay, are there, is it just a single sire line that's being tracked from Mark, or is there 5 generations with everyone with data collected? I mean, I think that's kind of the point that from an individual producer's point of view, they have to look at. We can't make a broad brush statement that says Mark animals are good or bad because the amount of data behind the data that's collected is very accurate. How much data is in there, though? I think that's the question.
Yeah, we need to find out if Mark says they're trying to help out the producers by sampling more than we are.
Yep.
We need to see how that works out.
Yep.
And so, yes, Len, I agree with you. So, David, you may or may not need to. I think Brad or Tom would help you with that. And I can help, and Lynn or I could probably help with that, or Lynn, Tom, and I could help you with that.
That would be great. I would appreciate that.
So if we could move on to talking about the submission form, in case no one has seen that. The submission form, Rusty has it up on the NSIP website right now. As you know, it has multiple tabs on it, including the issues related to the test sample itself, and then this whole nominated sires, nominated dams concept. Rusty, can you, would you be willing to walk people through that, and I can try and share a copy of that, or you can try and share a copy of it?
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. I can see if I can share my screen quick. folks seeing the spreadsheet now?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll just kind of we'll go through it. Maybe even put in a sample here, but in case you you need them, there's going to be instructions here on our first tab. And if folks aren't familiar with multiple tabs or sheets in Excel, look down here in the bottom left-hand corner. This is what we're talking about when we say different sheets or different tabs. So the first one here on the red tab, this is an instruction form. Should walk you through the details that you would need. The main form that we're going to use, and I think most people are going to use most often, is this green form labeled Test Sample Details. Okay, this green form here, this is what you're going to use to submit samples on animals that are being genotyped for the first time. Okay, so if there's not a genotype on file over in Australia, it's a naive animal going into the system, it's going to go through on this green tab here. Okay, so pretty simple, self-explanatory information up here at the top. Just your contact information, breed and flock code. That's just the first 6 digits of your ID numbers. And then we get into the meat of the matter here for the individual details of our individual animals. That starts here with the sample TSU number. So that's the number that's printed on every single TSU that you're taking. Okay, so we have our sample TSU number. Then we have 2 different columns for ID numbers. We have animal ID and NSIP ID number. Okay, so obviously NSIP ID number needs to be the full 16-digit ID number of those lambs. The animal ID number, you can utilize if you just want to use your flock tag or the nickname. If you're familiar with that phrase from Pedigree Master, that can be ear tag number, your flock ID tag. You can also just simply copy and paste your NSIP ID numbers into this animal ID field. Okay. If you utilize EIDs, you can put an EID number in here if you'd like as well. This information over here is going to be required for every animal. So the sex of the animal, M for male, F for female, the year that animal was born, and then the animal type. Okay, so that's going to be, if this is going to be a sire, it's going to be an S, a dam will be a D, P for progeny, and then the test name. Okay, the test names, if we scroll to the right just a little bit, we can find those over here with a description. For the vast majority of our animals, it's going to be the Genomics 50K test. Okay, so that's the full 50K panel for the genome enhanced EBVs, and it also includes parentage. Okay, for some of our other breeds that aren't doing, that don't have the genome enhanced EBVs just yet, they can utilize just parentage tests here. But for Katahdin breeders, the vast majority of us will be doing just the genomic 50K test. Okay, so that name, you can simply just copy that and paste it into this test name here. Okay, so again, this green form, this is all new animals, regardless if it's a sire, dam, or progeny. All new animals being genotyped for the first time go into this sheet right here. Okay, questions on that before we move on to the other 2 colored sheets?
So do we have to fill out every cell?
Do you have to fill out every cell?
Okay, so if the 16-digit ID is the same as the others, then we need to put that in a couple of them.
The ones that have to be filled out for new submissions is, I'll just go ahead and highlight them. We need to have the sample barcode. That's a bad color to choose. Let's go. Sample barcode is required. The NSIP ID is required. And then all these right here are required. Okay, so you have to have the sex, year of birth, animal type, and the test name. EID is optional. Animal ID, it's on your end, it's theoretically optional. If you don't include anything here in the ID column, I'm simply going to copy and paste your NSIP IDs and put them into this field.
So we would save you time if we copied it.
Yes, you would save time, and it's a pretty easy process. I can handle copying and pasting, but the less steps we have, the less chance there are for errors.
Thanks.
Okay, and under animal type, I just want to make sure you can have someone that is a sire as well as a progeny on this same run. Is that correct?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I just had a conversation with the folks at Neogen this morning about that, and got an answer on that. And glad you asked, because no, we can only have one animal type. Okay, so just to explain to other folks, if you're not familiar with this, is say here we're submitting genotypes on some 2020 and some 2021 born animals. And say we used one of those 2020 born ram lambs as a sire of our 2021 lamb crop. Okay, theoretically, that's we're genotyping that ram lamb for the first time, but he's being used as a sire, and we also want to know his parentage, so he'd also be a progeny. Okay, but Neogen only wants one animal type to be listed. Okay, so what we have to do in that situation, if you have an animal that has both a progeny and a sire, we need to do two different orders for that animal. Okay, and I feel free to call me on this. I will walk you through it. Okay, it might sound a little complicated being two orders, but it's really the same process, just doing it on two separate spreadsheets. What we do is we're first going to list that ram lamb as a progeny. Okay, or we're going to list him as a sire. We have to pick one or the other. And then we just need to open up a second spreadsheet, put that animal in the as a separate line item here, and pick whichever one that you didn't choose on the first spreadsheet. So you have to do two separate orders. You're only paying for that ram one time, but I need to submit it as two separate orders going into Neogen. Did that make sense, or was that too confusing?
That makes sense.
So
Okay.
essentially,
Like I
if we
said,
do
if-
one
if-
spreadsheet per lambing season per year, and then treat animal type by what they would be designated in that given year, we'd meet the requirements.
Yes, yep, that's one way to keep them straight. If you did one spreadsheet per lamb crop, that's one way to do it. If that's easiest for you, I think this, as we in the first couple submissions, this will be an issue that we'll have to overcome. But I think as we kind of get caught up on genotyping, it shouldn't be an issue into the future. So hopefully it's not that big of a deal. And like I said, I know it sounds complex. If you want some help, call me up and I'd be glad to walk you through it.
Just to be clear, you said separate spreadsheet, not separate line on the spreadsheet.
Correct. Yep. It needs to go in. When I enter this into the Neogen system, I need to enter this in as two separate orders for that one particular animal. So it's the real complex side is on my side of the table. So to help me out with that, to know that is if you can send me two separate spreadsheets, not two separate spreadsheets.
Two separate files then.
Correct. Two separate files.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thanks.
And if you could also use this column over here, use the notes column here, and just tell me that it will be sent in on a separate spreadsheet because it's a sire also. And since you're emailing this spreadsheet to me, again, put it in the body of the email explaining it. The more information that you can give me up front, the less phone calls and emails I'll be hounding you with on trying to get it all straightened out.
So if we submitted a animal as a lamb in the previous year and then next year we submit them as a sire, all we need is the 16-digit ID.
Correct. Yep. And that's going to move us on to the next step. We can come back to this if we have other questions, but if you have, just as Jim just explained, if you genotyped a ram lamb in 2020, you used him on 2021 lambs. Okay, we want to include him in the sire or in the parentage evaluation, but you're not regenotyping him. That's when these last two sheets down here in the bottom left-hand corner come into play. Okay, this blue sheet for nominated sires and the pink sheet for nominated dams, these two sheets are only used for animals that have already been genotyped. Okay, so if they've already been genotyped. What I really need on this spreadsheet are these two columns right here. I need the sire, the animal ID number, and the full 16-digit NSIP ID number. Okay. If you happen to know the TSU number that you used, you can enter that information if you want. It's not mandatory. What I really need is just that 16-digit ID number and the animal ID number. Okay. That genotype over in Australia will be linked to that 16-digit ID. So that's all the information that we would need on them. Okay. So
for
when you enter in all of your lambs on this green sheet, okay, and you have sires that you're utilizing that have already been genotyped, you list all the potential sires of those lambs here on this sheet. Okay, so if there's a chance that it could be the father of one of those lambs, listed on this sheet so it can be utilized in the parentage evaluation. If it's not listed on this sheet, it will not be utilized in the parentage evaluation in Australia.
Okay, Rusty. So going back to where we're catching up with previous sires and lamb crops, let's say I got a 2020, I'm sending you two different spreadsheets. So the first spreadsheet, I'm going to put everybody born 2020 and before. And then when I send in all of this year's lambs that were born in 2021 on this second file, then do I put also put the nominated sires even though they haven't been done before?
Let me think about that. Yes, because that genotype will be on file then. So they can go on this nominated list.
Wait, Rusty. I understood Janet's question a little different than that. I think if two different files are sent to Rusty at the same time, you do not use the nominated sire list. If they're coming on different batch dates, then you do. Or am I mistaken, Rusty?
Okay, yeah, no, thanks for clarifying that, Lynn. Yeah, that's, if it's within the same batch date, correct, we will not use the nominated sire list. If you send in your previous samples on one batch date and then the next one, then we would use the nominated list.
So how are they going to know what sires to compare all of our lambs to?
So the Turners don't have any sheep in the nominated.
Okay.
In the
well,
OREI, so they're
right, and that's I worked this out with the Aussies. Is that it requires a special note from me to tell them that, hey, you need to look at the genotypes that are being submitted now because they're going to show up as both a progeny and a sire. So that's I need to know that so that I can tell them to look into that as a potential nominated sire.
Rusty, I have a question again. So it's actually two questions. So as far as animals that have been genotyped previously, anything that was on Jones' grant has been genotyped previously, is that correct?
Jim here, so the list that
right
Lois sent you back.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about though.
Yes, so
okay,
just that list, that's not necessarily all the animals that are on the grant. That it was
right. Gotcha. Okay. The second part of the question though is, so my 2021 lambs, I used 3 ram lambs. So they would not have been genotyped yet. They were 2020 lambs. Okay. But when I put them in and my 2020 replacement ewes, their sires would have been part of that genotyping.
Yeah.
So would I put those under the nominated sire list? Even though I'm doing 2 different files this year, one for 2020, one for 2021?
So
does that make sense?
So the nominated sires for your 2020 replacement ewes and ram lambs would include those, and then your nominated sires for your 2021 would include your new group. Since you're doing 2 lamb crops at one time. Right, Rusty, Tom, Lynn?
Okay.
Yeah.
Rusty, I have a question. Is it possible for you to create some scenarios and just put them online or
On a website.
on the website that we can go in and study the scenarios and know how to do these forms?
Yeah, I could do that. That might be the easiest way to kind of get through some of these. A lot of these are going to be unique, and we're just going to have to work through them as we get through this first year of them. But yeah, I can come up with some scenarios. But in the short term, is that an animal, unless there is a genotype on file in Australia at this exact moment, it does not go on this blue sheet. Okay. If it's being genotyped for the very first time, put it on this green sheet here. Okay. Give me a note in this note section, give me a note in the email, and then we can get them sorted out and get them into the right, I can get them ordered in the correct way. But unless there's a genotype on file right now in Australia, they won't go on the blue sheet or on the pink sheet.
Okay, that helps.
Okay.
And those notes will help Rusty and you figure out how you should really fill out the spreadsheet.
Like I said, I have to put all this information in when I actually order the tests at Neogen, so those notes will really help me to sort them out. And please be, you won't be offended if you write it to be understood by a kindergartner, because, you know, I don't know what's going on in everybody's individual flocks. So please treat me like I'm dumb and tell me absolutely everything I could possibly need to know about them, and I can get them put in there. Other questions we have on the submission sheet?
And I just want to, Rusty, you did say that if we do the 50K chip test, that also includes parentage, right?
Correct. If you indicate genomic 50K test, that should include the parentage as well.
And conditions.
And conditions.
Correct.
What is the parent rerun test?
So the parent rerun, that's actually something we're working through some scenarios right now. Is you say that there was a well, in Jones' project, there was a ram that or a genotype that they thought was for a ram, but the lambs that we thought were going to be out of that ram, none of those lambs came back to be identified to that ram. So that sounds like we took the wrong sample, was paired up with the wrong ID number or something like that. Okay, so that means that we need to overwrite the genotype in Australia that the system thinks goes with that ID number. So that's why we're using this parent rerun column here to straighten out a pedigree error from a previous parentage evaluation.
So from the OREI grant, there's about 8 or 9 rams that definitely applies to. And you know, I've been wondering how to do this. So thanks, Rusty. This is the rerun.
Yeah.
You know, there's one ram that was supposed to be the sire of 60 lambs that the DNA sample said, no, he's not the sire of any of those. And another one at 45. So this is how we do it. So great, Rusty.
And that's if you really want to know the nitty-gritty details in that scenario of a ram lamb who's a progeny and a sire, That's actually how I have to submit that test order. Is that first we're going to submit him as a sire, and then I'm going to submit him as a parentage rerun and include just him plus all the potential sires of him. So that's the technical detail of what I have to do on my end, is that animals getting entered in twice, once as parentage evaluation, once as a parentage rerun. But you guys don't need to worry about that. That's everything I do. I do all that on my end.
And if we have rams that we purchased from other flocks that were in Joan's test, we just assume that all of those are correct and there's no problems with those.
Send an email to Joan and I on which those are.
Okay.
Because only a portion of the lambs in the project actually were snipped. And of those, only a portion, a high percentage, but still there's a few of those that DNA sample wasn't of a decent quality or whatever. So you can't assume.
In the future, once we start to get these genotypes on file after this first run, we are working with the folks with the searchable database, is that we are going to have a section on there that'll tell you if an animal has been genotyped or not. So if you purchase in an outside ram and you have a question on whether he was genotyped or not, you can type that ID number into the searchable database and find that answer right there.
So we shouldn't get caught in the trap because we're only doing parentage on the ones that are indicated on the blue sheet, the blue or the pink sheet. So if we bought a ram and we genotype it and it comes from a flock that is genotyped, we hopefully will not get caught in the trap of finding out that the ram isn't the right parentage back in the flock of origin, correct?
Yeah, let's hope so.
That's on how they tested. I have a ewe that had 5 lambs over 8 weeks from the project. And I haven't figured that one out. So did I cross-contaminate a sample? Is she the closest dam to all those lambs? I don't know.
This is Joan. Just remember that genotyping isn't perfect. There's lots of places where errors can be introduced. If you're handling, like Jim just said, if you're handling multiple samples, you got 2 blood samples and you contaminate the 2, that can introduce errors. So if you feel like you're right and you come back with an error, I would question it. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's pretty good, but there's still a lot of places for errors.
Yeah, definitely evaluate what's come back to you. That it's incredibly small chance, but Neogen could have put the wrong sample in the wrong well when they did the snipping. It's more likely that you made the error in your labeling or assigning, but there is that potential. So if they come with a sire you haven't used in 3 years, you need to know, that's wrong. You need to come back and look at it, but most of the time they're probably right. Neogen's probably right.
Final thoughts on sample spreadsheet? Hearing none, I will share my screen again. Okay, I might have to start over here. There we go. So batching dates. We talked about a May 1st batching date last week, and that's what we're settling in on right now. So we should all be preparing for that. It's safe to assume at this point, I think, that if we submit our samples to Rusty by May 1st, we should be receiving our results back. The final results we should have in about 8 weeks' time. And we're seriously hoping for less than that, but please account for that. So May 1st is going to give you July 1st until further notice. But that's what we're heading for. Hopefully it won't be quite that long, and hopefully as we really get this thing more streamlined, it'll be significantly less than that. Someone mentioned last week about the batch date itself and what that actually meant. And I think we need to be clear that the batch date is the date that it needs to be received at Rusty's office in Iowa. Okay, so if it's May 1st, then you have to ship your samples however it takes to get them to him by May 1st, or risk running at the next batch date. So I can't make that any more clear. So if that means overnighting or some crazy expense like that, that's up to you. If you're a last minute person, go for it, I guess.
Tom, I think as chairman of NSIP, I want to protect Rusty here. And he goes to his mailbox to pick up the mail. And so if he goes on the 1st and brings home the samples and processes whatever is in the mail on the 1st, and he goes back to the mailbox on the 2nd to mail, or to the post office to mail the samples, and there's more samples in there, you've missed it. Because he's not going to make another trip back to his house to reprocess to add more samples. Okay, he picked everything up on the 1st. He has his box already sealed and ready to mail when he goes back to the post office on the 2nd. So I just hope everyone understands that.
Thanks, Lynn.
In my mind, I'm just saying, April 15th is the deadline to have it in the mail. Just give a 2-week buffer there. That might be the safe thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. Does he prefer to get US Mail, UPS, American Express? Does it matter?
American Express.
Rusty, I'll let you answer that one because we've debated on how to do that.
Yeah, there's, well, first I want to say that May 1st, that's the cutoff date. Is I will accept samples earlier. And if you have samples, I would encourage you, please send them earlier. So I'm not burning the midnight oil May 1st evening, so I can get them all sent in on May 2nd. Secondly is, we're asking you to ship these to the standard NSIP PO box. I know that not all carriers will mail to a PO box, so you might want to check with your carrier on whether they will or not. In extreme circumstances, we can have them shipped to my house, which I think that's a decision that still needs to be made on the NSIP board side of things, if that's something we want to allow or not. I would prefer that they go to the PO box if at all possible. So you might need to check with, if you have UPS or FedEx or whoever, if they'll deliver to a PO box.
It's just my opinion, but I just do not think that it's the parcel post right now is not a reliable way to ship samples. And if we're working on a deadline, I just have serious reservations about that. I've just known so many packages that have been completely lost, delayed, whatever. Doesn't matter if it's insured. Doesn't matter. You're just gonna, if you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline. So I just, like Roxanne said before, it's really up in the air. But that's my opinion, and I respect other people want to continue to use the post office. But
Well, in my years in the KHSI office, which hasn't included Louis DeJoy, PO box worked fine. But so if we're going PO box, I think it has to be US mail. And there is a tracking number. So if you do pay for priority mail, if you pay priority mail, you will get a tracking number. That's not saying it'll arrive on time.
no, or even arrive.
Yeah, but it will. It should show you whether it made it or not. And they have tracking numbers for all the major systems.
Distribution centers, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's an NSIP board question with Rusty as to whether we go with US mail, which I think will be the only one that can deliver to a PO box.
We've talked about this pretty extensively. That there's two options. Neither one of them is 100% awesome and fail safe. Like I said, the only other option is having them delivered to our house, which is fine. We've already had to deal with that. So that's if that's the only way to get the samples sent in, then we can go that route.
So I guess I would just say between now and the next couple of weeks, we'll get out some further guidance on what that is based on some further discussions from Lynn and the NSIP board, I guess. But I think we do need to let everybody know sooner rather than later with regards to that, because there are potentially some issues that will crop up about samples not arriving. I think it's just inevitable.
Samples set on a porch is also a liability, and so that's a problem. And so I think the board's not going to meet until after the batching deadline. So I'd say let's assume that it's the PO box at this time.
Oh.
I would think that the executive board could make a decision. And Teresa just told me that check with your local FedEx office, and you can arrange to pick up at the FedEx office. So Rusty, you could go in once every 3 to 5 days.
There's a charge to that, Jim.
Yeah, we've looked into that, Jim.
We've looked into it.
Okay.
Well,
nice try.
Just in full transparency, what we pay for our PO box for a year, they were charging that every month to pick up at a UPS or FedEx. So that in order to keep costs low on this for everybody, those are our two options. And yeah, I've used the Postal Service an awful lot, and it's gotten a lot better after the holiday season. This holiday, there was some definite issues, but since then I haven't had any issues with it. So,
okay.
But yeah.
I mean, plan ahead.
Yep.
Don't ship at the last moment.
So we are looking at a suggested second batch date of July 15th. I think we'll know more. I mean, that's what it is at the moment, but I would say it's probably still subject to slight revision if people feel that another week or so is necessary. And we'd welcome feedback on that as we go forward. if people have, you know, and theoretically, we may need another date here this late fall or winter. So we haven't really discussed that in any detail yet, just trying to get this thing underway. But that's what we're thinking about at this moment. But if you have thoughts for fall lambing, or if people are pasture lambing, that sort of thing, and when you would have samples ready by, we'd like to know that. So let us know.
Well, if Rusty gets a batch of 96 samples, let's say after May 1st, he gets enough to do 96, can he just go ahead and submit them then?
If it is exactly 96 samples, yes, I could. If it's anything less or anything more than that, no. Just because they're trying to fill their plates. And the other kind of thing with that is that we know that with these batching dates, these samples, they have a spot in the queue to be genotyped right away. If I just send in a batch of 96 samples on a random date, you know, they have other orders from other species that are going to be ahead of the queue. So we don't know what the type of turnaround time is going to be on that. Just to give a little idea of that, with the test batch that we had sent in, you know, we didn't have a preset date for them to receive those samples. It was just, it had to go to the end of their queue. Those samples were sent in the 5th of March. They were received to Neogen on the 8th of March. And we got, the Aussies got the genotypes on the 23rd of March. So that was, I said, those samples go into the back of the queue at Neogen. If it's on our sample date, we know that the samples will be received that day. They'll probably be genotyped the very next day. We can have a lot more assurance on our turnaround time.
Okay. Final thoughts on batching? Let me just touch on a couple of other things before we open it up for any final questions. As many of you know, or you're aware of, that KHSI, specifically the NSIP committee within KHSI, with the help of Rusty and others, received a grant from the Sheep Center back. We put it in last summer, and we were awarded the grant last fall. And in that grant, we budgeted for genotyping of lambs of, let's call them lower quality or lower end lambs, ones that we didn't think producers would be willing to pay for. But that was like back in September or August, and we've all learned a heck of a lot since then. In some detailed discussions with Dr. Lewis, we've learned that through Joan's project and the construction of the genomic reference population, he feels we've captured we've adequately captured the genetic diversity on these production traits in the Katahdin breed at this point in time, and there's probably no reason to reach into that lower group of animals within the current lamb crop. So at this point in time, we probably don't need to spend that money on that. And what we're thinking about is additional ways to spend those funds, and we're thinking about applying that to youth locks in some way, or in a combination of ways. So we had funds in there to help subsidize the payment of low quality lambs. Without that, we're thinking about switching those subsidies over to assisting flocks with building the genomic pedigrees through use, especially that would really help the flocks that were not part of Joan's original project and not part of that original reference population. So that would really help solidify the overall, the breed-wide degree, we feel. So that would be an ideal use for those funds. We have not settled on a mechanism for how to determine which ewes, which flocks, any of that yet. We have discussed in some detail that we believe the best approach would be at the end of the season, once we see what's come in as to how to do that. So we can't actually give you an idea of how much you would get back, just that there would be some, we have some funds to help defray those costs. And this is an ongoing discussion. We've just started having this, and we do need to receive, we believe we need to receive permission from the Sheep Center to adjust that from the lower quality lambs, which will be proposed to older ewes. So with that in mind, I say just stay tuned, and we may be able to help folks pay for some of this genotyping at some point here in the future. Certainly, we won't be doing it for several months, but that's the idea. There's also this issue of the final steps in validation. So currently, Dr. Daniel Brown at AgBoo is working with Dr. Lewis on getting the final testing done on the reference population and making sure that it behaves as they believe the models should behave with regards to adding the genomic component to the evaluation. And there's a number of steps, and I believe we're on step 3, which is the third step. And once that's complete, then, as you've heard this term of flipping the switch, we will then flip the switch, and the Katahdin evaluation will be entirely genomic enhanced, not just those flocks participating. Everybody will receive some degree of benefit, although the most benefit will come to those individual animals who have actually been genotyped. But let me just say that we're not done validation yet, and we have been given assurances that we will that validation process will be complete about the time that we're going to get our results back on the first round. I would say there's no guarantee there, but that's what we've been given for assurances, and trust me, we have asked that question several thousand times since December. And so we're getting close, and we're down to validation step 3. We're not quite there yet, but we don't have any samples in the queue yet either. So it's getting close, but we've been told that it will happen. So related to that is this idea that in that process, we've known for some time that, I mean, all the breed evaluations need to have their parameters updated from time to time. And I'm not even aware if this has been updated since the beginning of NSIP for Katahdins. Jim would probably know, but at this point in time, it's through this validation step, it's been revealed that it would be a good time to do this and make one adjustment to the entire Katahdin evaluation all at once, rather than to do it incrementally over time and us have multiple shifts in this thing as we go forward. So Dr. Lewis has informed us that they are planning to update the parameters, which are essentially the metrics in the mathematical equations that help us arrive at the estimated breeding values, whether that's the heritabilities and other coefficients in those mathematical models. So when you get I guess the upshot of the whole thing is once you get your genomic enhanced breeding values back, it's not just going to reflect the change to genomic evaluation. It's also going to include the effects of updating the parameters. Okay, so there's going to be, again, there's going to be a slight increase or decrease in the genomic enhanced estimated breeding value. The parameters, however, may reset things a little bit differently, and it may in fact bring everybody to a new high or a new low. So we have to get used to the adjustment, and I've been assured that we'll be able to understand, or at least Dr. Lewis will be able to understand, the degree to which genomics is moving things around and which the parameter update is moving the breeding values around. So it's going to be across all traits as far as I've heard, and we've only known about it here for a little over a week. So this is really the first opportunity to speak to a larger group of Katahdin folks about this. And so just letting you know that this is coming down the pike, and we're gonna see that at the same time as the genomic enhanced breeding values hit the road. So so with that, I have no other slides tonight and no other talking points. So if others have folks on any of these three topics or anything else we want to go back to, that's great. It is it's 10:09 right now, so we've been going for almost 2 hours. So I'd like to wrap it up in the next 10 minutes if we can. So
Tom, this is Jim. Let's spend just a minute on the updating parameters, and Joan can weigh in.
Sure.
So a paper with Notter, Joan, and I, and her postdoc, Loretta, we've had new breeding, heritabilities for most of the traits since 2017 and 18. The major change is in the weaning and post-weaning fecal egg counts. So does Ron have new ones, or is he just going to update with what our prior research does? If it's just the prior research, heritability of post-weaning fecal egg count is going to go from about 40 or 43% to 23. So that's, the rest of them are all really minor. They'll be nuanced. And Joan, do you agree with that? If she's still on?
Yeah. And I also wondered about the preterient rise, if that was going to be included on the mature ewes.
That would be a software change.
I haven't heard about the periparturient rise, but what you and Jim just said is my, I don't know the details on it, but that's my understanding, that some traits will likely be more affected than others, and that most were a very minor tweak. So
they are going through, and they are getting new estimates based on the data that's in the database. I think they're looking at previous literature to help in that process as well, but they are recalculating all these adjustment factors. And this is something that was actually on the schedule to do last year. It's, I don't know, some of you might not know, is that actually Ron Lewis was planning on taking a sabbatical to go visit with the scientists in Australia to work on these things. He wanted to update all the parameters for all the breeds in NSIP. He got over there, spent a few weeks there, but unfortunately, that's right when COVID hit and they were closing borders down. So he had to cut his sabbatical short and return back here to the States. So yeah, it's been on the schedule to do for over a year now. This genomics project has just given him the opportunity to get that accomplished, get the data sets he needed to get that work done. And it's exciting that we're going to have all these new updated parameters.
I think the big changes is post-weaning fecal egg count. The rest of them are going to be more nuanced. And what it's going to do is that more emphasis on the pedigree and less emphasis on the individual post-weaning fecal egg count. Since
that's what they're working on right now. So trying to figure out is it going to be a big difference or not? They're working through the data to figure out those answers.
So post-weaning fecal egg count heritabilities prior to the 2017 data was 40%, and it's going to drop to 23%, which says that
well, it'll drop by whatever amount Daniel Brown and Ron Lewis comes up with. But I think the point here, the important point for the producers looking at their data, these parameter changes probably will not affect the rank, but it may affect the EBV. Genomics, though, while net, it's not going to change anything for the breed, it will change the rank of animals. And so instead of trying to do 2 changes within a calendar year, that's why the decision was made. We're going to make all the changes at one time. And I mean, I'm happy to say that genomically, validation steps 1 and 2 went through in flying colors. The hang up was on validation step 3, and that dealt with some of these parameter issues. And so I think as a Katahdin breeder, I'm excited because not only are we going to get genomically enhanced EBVs, we're going to have updated parameters. And that's something that as the NSIP board's working on, we're trying to figure out funding to get that for all the other breeds as well. But luckily, thank you, Joan, thank you, Jim, thank you, Ron Lewis, for having this grant. Our parameters are being updated as part of a research project, and that is helping us tremendously. And so it's going to be exciting, I think, for the Katahdin breed to get both of these at the same time.
That increases our accuracy of selection, which increases the rate of progress. We'll be more likely to select the right animals.
Yep.
And I think it's worth saying here that it's not that the current evaluation is wrong. It's that we have more information, better techniques now that we can make it, I guess, more right isn't the right term, but more accurate evaluation.
More accurate.
Yeah.
So it's all good news. Final thoughts from folks on anything related to sample collection and submission and the whole process?
You know, we're here to help y'all through this. I hope you got the sense of what Tom was trying to say tonight. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. There might be a better or a worse answer for your particular situation, depending if you're brand new or if you've been a long-time producer, depending on whether you're part of the reference population or not. It's don't be scared to go forward with this process. You know, submit the number of DNA samples that you're comfortable with your budget. Talk to us if you want to talk through some scenarios, but don't be scared to go forward, because this is an exciting time, and you know, the more data the better, but don't break your personal bank account trying to sample everything. I mean, I think that's the advice I would give tonight.
I've told a number of people this week that there's no better time to start building the genomic pedigree for your flock than right now. So if you have reservations about it, you know, stick a toe in the water and start to do your sires and some lambs, and if you can swing it, do some of those ewes too. So
is it?
Can I say something, David?
Yes. Is it safe to say that we kind of know what we hope we might get, and we kind of know where we hope we might go, and all we can do is kind of jump in and get started, and we'll know a bunch more next year.
Yes.
You know, but
Very fair.
you know, you
Fair.
you can be an early adapter or you cannot be. You know, it's just kind of up to you.
Yeah, I agree, David. And I mean, I think Ron Lewis's, if you go back and listen to his webinar, this is going to make a big difference on young, unproven lambs, lambs without a lot of data behind them. And you're right, we'll learn more as we go forward. So,
Lynn, basically, this is what whoever her name was got us all excited about at Clay Center when we were out there, whenever that was, you know.
Noel Cockett.
And
yeah,
and a lot of people, you guys have put a lot of work in on this, and I think that I think it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your efforts.
Yeah, appreciate it, David.
Thanks to everybody for sitting through multiple weeks of webinars on Tuesday nights. Really appreciate it, and nice participation tonight. 21 people still on here right at the bitter end after 2 hours. So thank you so much. Any final thoughts, or we'll close it out, and it's supper time on the East Coast.
Just that there's very few volunteer organizations that would have people put in that much time, that much effort that you guys have done, man. So it's just incredible, and anyone that doesn't realize that is, you know, is going to be amazed at the efforts that have been put in on the volunteer hours from a, you know, select group of people, and you know, and a ton of people as well, but really a core group like Tom and Lynn have just pounded this thing out.
And we've had these updated parameters for 3 years, and so this is it's great to see that we're at, you know, because I've been mentioning it to Ron, say for 3 years that we've had these updated parameters from Joan Burke's and Dave Notter's study, and so doing this is great. So that last thing there, besides the genomics, is special as well.
Thanks. That is a good point. Okay, folks.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Good night to everybody, and just keep communicating with us. I think we will probably pull this group back together sometime, let's say, you know, late June, early July, once we get our first run back from the first batch, and we'll talk about interpretation of parentage reports and genetic conditions and all that sort of thing. So I think we'll have a lot more to talk about then. So thank you so much, and have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew.
Tom and Lynn, for suggesting tonight's session and discussion. This was good, so appreciate you all suggesting that, and Rusty for all your input, and Jim as well. So thank you for that. Hopefully we answered some questions tonight.